I never wanted to be a doctor. Let me say that clearly before anything else, because the rest of what happened, the party, the photograph, the thing my mother did in front of 200 people, only makes sense if you understand that medicine was never my dream. It was Sorel's. Sorel. Even her name was chosen with intention, like everything else about her life. My mother named us both, of course, but she named Sorel first, which tells you everything. I came 7 minutes later, a surprise the ultrasound hadn't predicted, and I was given the name Cassia. Functional, fine, an afterthought. Like most things involving me. We shared a womb for 9 months, a bedroom for 18 years, and a gross anatomy cadaver for the first semester of medical school. That last part sounds like a bonding experience. It was not. By the time we unzipped that black bag together and stood across from each other with scalpels in hand, we had already been at war for so long that neither of us could remember the ceasefire. But I need to back up, because the story doesn't start in that lab. It starts the summer before we applied, when I told my mother I wanted to study environmental law. She set down her coffee cup so carefully it made no sound at all. That silence was louder than anything she could have said. Cassia, she said, and the way she said my name, like it was a mild inconvenience she'd grown accustomed to, I already knew what was coming. You're going to apply to medical school. With Sorel. I want to study law, Mom. You want to follow your sister. Sorel doesn't study law. Sorel is going to be a surgeon. She picked her coffee back up. The conversation, apparently, was over. You'll apply together. It'll be good for her to have someone familiar nearby while she adjusts. There it was. I would be a doctor so that Sorel could have a soft landing. I have thought about that moment 10,000 times since then. I have turned it over in my mind like a stone you keep finding in your pocket, smooth from handling. I could have refused. I know that now. I didn't know it then, or rather, I knew it and chose not to believe it, which is a different kind of blindness entirely. So I applied. We both got in, which surprised me more than it should have. I was a good student. I just didn't think of myself as one, which is what happens when you spend your formative years standing next to someone your mother regards as exceptional. You start to see yourself through her eyes. You become background. Medical school is brutal in ways that people who haven't done it cannot fully appreciate. It isn't just the volume of information or the hours or the sleep deprivation, though all of that is real. It's the sustained pressure of being reminded daily that the stakes are human lives, that incompetence here has a different weight than incompetence elsewhere, that you are being shaped into someone who will hold people's lives in your hands, and the shaping process involves systematically dismantling everything comfortable about who you were before. I found, to my genuine shock, that I was good at it. Not just passing the exams good. I mean, I was the person my classmates came to when they couldn't understand a concept. I was the one who saw the pattern in a differential diagnosis that everyone else was missing. My third year attending, a vascular surgeon named Dr. Prudhomme, who had the bedside manner of a geological formation and handed out compliments the way a desert hands out rain, told me after a particularly complicated case that I had the best clinical instincts she had seen in a resident in 15 years. I didn't tell my mother. By then, I had learned not to. Sorel was good too. I want to be precise about this because I'm not interested in diminishing her. She was genuinely talented, diligent, technically skilled, with a memory that bordered on photographic. She wanted surgery the way some people want to breathe. There was never a moment of doubt for her, never a night she lay awake wondering if she'd made a wrong turn. Medicine was her religion, and she practiced it with a convert's ferocity. What Sorel was not, and this is something I noticed long before I had words for it, was curious about the person inside the patient. She saw bodies. She solved problems. She repaired, excised, sutured. She was extraordinarily good at the mechanical work of surgery. But ask her why a 53-year-old woman with no risk factors had presented with the specific constellation of symptoms that led her to the table, and Sorel would stare at you with the polite incomprehension of someone asked to explain a language they'd never heard. I was obsessed with the why. I couldn't sleep until I understood it. That difference between us, I think, is the truest thing I can say about who we were. 4 years passed. We did not grow closer. We did not grow further apart. We maintained the careful, calibrated distance of two people who share a gravitational center and have learned to orbit without collision. We were civil. We were sometimes warm. We never talked about the thing at the center, which was our mother, which was the party. The party. Let me tell you about the party. Graduation from medical school is a significant event, an 8-year accumulation of sacrifice made visible in a single afternoon. There were 500 of us walking across that stage, and behind every one of us there were people who had lived through the years of absence, the missed holidays, the frantic phone calls from hospital corridors. The whole auditorium was vibrating with a kind of communal release, like a held breath finally exhaled. My mother had been planning Sorel's graduation party for months. I knew this. She had mentioned it in passing several times with the specific casualness of someone who wants you to notice something without having to acknowledge they want you to notice it. The venue, the guest list, the florist she'd found who specialized in white peonies because those were Sorel's favorite. The speech she was writing for the toast. She did not mention a party for me. I told myself this was fine. I had developed a substantial capacity for telling myself things were fine. It is a survival skill that looks, from the outside, like serenity, and from the inside, like a very quiet scream that has been running for so long you've stopped hearing it. 2 weeks before graduation, my cousin Marette called me. Marette and I had always been close, in the way that people become close when they are both slightly outside the center of gravity of their respective families. Peripheral, overlooked, companionable in our marginality. "Kasia," she said, and her voice had the specific texture of someone who has decided to say a hard thing. "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "Did you know your mom told people the party is only for Sorel? Like, explicitly. She sent invitations, and at the bottom it says, 'This celebration is in honor of Dr. Sorel.' Your name isn't on them." The silence between us was the length of a slow breath. "I figured," I said. "You figured." Marette's tone shifted. "Kasia, you're also graduating. You're also a doctor. You did the same 8 years." "I know." "Your mother is insane." "I know that too." I sat with it for several days. The thing about injustice you've lived with long enough is that it stops feeling like injustice and starts feeling like weather, something you dress for, something you endure, something fundamentally outside the category of things that can be changed. I had spent so long dressing for this particular weather that I had almost forgotten it wasn't the climate everywhere. But something had shifted in me during those 4 years of medical school. Dr. Prudhomme had something to do with it. The patients had something to do with it. Standing in a room where someone's entire family was looking at me because I was the one who understood what was happening in a body they loved, that does something to your sense of your own weight in the world. It reminded me that I existed, that I was not background. I made a decision. I would go to the party. Not because I was invited. I wasn't, technically. I would go because I was Sorel's twin sister, and we had graduated together, and whatever performance of celebration my mother had staged, I was not going to absent myself from my own life. I bought a dress that was the color of deep water. I arranged my hair the way I liked it, not the way my mother had always suggested I should. And I assembled 3 things that I was going to give to Sorel regardless of the atmosphere: a gift, a card, and a photograph. The photograph. I have to tell you about the photograph because it is the hinge on which everything turns. When Sorel and I were 11 years old, our father, who had left when we were 3, who had been reduced in my mother's telling to a figure of casual villainy, a man who had abandoned his family, sent us each a birthday card. The cards were homemade. He'd drawn them himself, which I thought was touching and my mother found contemptible. Inside each card was a note. Mine said he was proud of whoever I was becoming, that he thought about us every day, that he hoped one day we'd be able to talk. My mother took both cards before we'd finished reading them. She said he had no right, that we were to have nothing to do with him, that he was dead to this family. She threw the cards away. I had already taken a photograph of mine with the disposable camera I'd been given for my birthday. What I did not know until I was 26, doing a residency rotation in a city far enough from home that I had finally started breathing differently, was that my father was not the villain my mother had assembled. I found him through a combination of stubbornness and the particular investigative instinct that makes a good clinician. He was a retired marine biologist living in coastal Maine, remarried, gentle, bewildered by his own exile from our lives. Over 2 years, we built something careful and genuine. He told me his version. It was different from my mother's in almost every particular. He had not abandoned us. He had been told to leave, had been denied access, had tried and failed for years through legal channels that my mother had navigated with the same ruthless efficiency she brought to everything. He had 2 photographs of us. He had kept our birthday cards. Sorel did not know any of this. My mother had made sure of it. The photograph I was bringing to the party was a recent one, taken 3 months earlier when I had flown to Maine and sat on a porch with this man who had our eyes, and told me that every year on our birthday, he drove to the ocean and said our names out loud so they wouldn't disappear into the air. On the back of the photograph, I had written, "He's been looking for you too." The card was sealed. I addressed it to Sorel. The party was held at a restaurant called Halcyon, which my mother had rented out entirely. 40 tables, white peonies, a string quartet that played unobtrusively in the corner. It was beautiful, I'll give her that. Whatever her failures as a parent, she had genuine aesthetic talent and the financial resources to deploy it. I arrived 20 minutes after the party started, which I had calculated carefully, late enough that the initial surge of arrivals would be over, early enough that leaving before the toasts would seem like rudeness rather than strategy. I wore the deep water dress, and I walked in with the measured unhurriedness of someone who had decided to take up space. The reaction was interesting to observe. Some people smiled, genuinely delighted to see me. Some people looked uncertain, the way people look when they've been told one thing and are watching a different thing happen. And some people, my mother's friends, the ones who had received the invitations, had the specific frozen expression of witnesses to an incident they'd been given advance warning about. My mother saw me from across the room. The distance between us was about 30 feet, and across that distance, I watched her face do something I had not seen it do before. Lose control. Not for long. A second, maybe 2, but I saw it. Sorel saw me, and for a moment, just a moment, something happened in her expression that I had no vocabulary for. It was not happiness, exactly. It was not displeasure. It was something rawer and less legible than either of those, something that lived in the basement of the face where the unprocessed feelings are stored. She crossed the room. "You came," she said. "We graduated together," I said. She opened her mouth and closed it and opened it again and said, "I didn't know she wasn't going to invite you. I want you to know that." "I know," I said, and I did know. Whatever the nature of our relationship, Sorel had never been deliberately cruel. She was, at her worst, oblivious, shaped by the same warping force I had been, but differently, because she had been the center of it. My mother arrived at my elbow. Her voice was a careful, quiet blade. "Cassia, this wasn't the plan." "I'm sure we can fit another chair," I said pleasantly. "I'd like you to leave." "I'd like a gin and tonic," I said, and walked toward the bar. I found a seat at a table with Marette and 2 of Sorel's medical school friends, who had always treated me like a full human being. I ate the food, which was excellent. I talked about medicine. I laughed at things that were genuinely funny. I watched my mother move through the room like a boat adjusting its heading around an unexpected obstacle. Then came the toasts. The MC was a man named Florentius, who worked as an event host and had been hired specifically for the occasion. He had the practiced warmth of someone who does this 40 times a year, and the carrying voice of a man who has never used a microphone he didn't trust. He began moving through cards and messages that guests had submitted, a custom Sorel apparently loved, where people could write notes to be read aloud. I had submitted my card before arriving. I had written my contribution clearly, knowing it would be read in public. Florentius worked through the first 6 or 7 messages. Colleagues from the hospital, a professor, a family friend. Each one a variation on the theme of achievement and promise, and the long road behind and the longer one ahead. The room listened with the fond half-attention of people who are comfortable and warm and slightly full. Then he picked up my card. I knew it was mine because I had used ivory paper, not the white cards provided, and I saw his eyes move to the name on the envelope before he opened it. The way he paused, only for half a second, told me he had noticed something. He read my name aloud as the sender. The room did not shift exactly, but there was a redistribution of attention, the way a room changes when someone drops something fragile. People who hadn't been looking up looked up. People who had been talking stopped. Sorel, Florentius read, with the practiced warmth of a man who reads other people's emotions for a living and has no access to the full weight of what he's carrying. Tonight, I watched you receive something you have spent your entire life earning. I am proud of you in a way that runs so deep I don't have better words for it. But there is one gift I want to give you tonight that isn't mine to give. It belongs to someone else. In the envelope inside this card, you'll find a photograph of a man who has been speaking your name to the ocean every year on your birthday since you were 3 years old. He's been looking for you. His name is on the back, and you're allowed to know him. The room was already silent. I mean that precisely. Not the silence of people waiting for what comes next, but the silence of people who have stopped expecting what comes next and are simply inhabiting the present moment with all of their attention. My mother moved. I watched her rise from her chair at the head table, and I understood in that movement every year of her effort, the maintenance of a particular story, the management of a particular world, the work of keeping 2 daughters inside a version of reality that served her. She was across the room before Florentius had finished processing what was happening. She reached for the microphone. She was too late. Not because Florentius held it away from her. He wouldn't have known to do that. Too late because the room had already heard, and hearing is irreversible, and there is no microphone that can unring a bell. She stood at the front of a room full of people who were watching her with an expression she had never intended to cultivate, and that expression was understanding. I looked at Sorel. Sorel was holding the card. She had not opened the inner envelope yet. She was very still, and I recognized the particular quality of her stillness. It was the stillness of someone inside whom something large and structural has just shifted, and who is waiting to discover what the new shape of things looks like. My mother turned from the microphone to the room, and then her eyes found mine. There was no disguise in them. There was only the truth of a person who has spent 30 years building something and is watching it develop its first real crack, and knows in her cells that cracks do not stop at one. I held her gaze. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment because I think it matters to tell it true. I did not feel triumph. I had expected to feel something like triumph. And instead, I felt a grief so quiet and so complete, it was almost indistinguishable from peace. Grief for all the years. For the version of our family that could have existed. For my mother, who had so deeply believed her management of us was love that she had never had to examine it. For Sorel, who was about to have to relearn part of her own history. And for my father, somewhere in coastal Maine, who had told me once that he had stopped hoping we'd call, but had never stopped leaving the possibility open, like a door you no longer expect a visitor through, but don't have the heart to lock. Sorel opened the inner envelope. She looked at the photograph for a long time. The string quartet had stopped playing. Florentius had stepped discreetly away from the podium. The room had the quality of a collective breath held in solidarity with a stranger's private moment. Then Sorel looked up and found me across the room and said, loudly enough that people could hear, "How long have you known?" 2 years, I said. He's still alive? Yes. She looked back at the photograph. Her shoulders rose once with something that was either a breath or the beginning of something she was deciding not to cry. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. But okay in the register of someone accepting a fundamental reorientation rather than a small adjustment. My mother had not moved from the front of the room. She was standing very still, and for the first time in my memory, she looked her age, which she had always before managed to avoid looking. She looked like a woman who is very tired, and has been very tired for a long time, and has only just stopped moving fast enough to notice it. I did not go to her. Not then. That is a different story, one that played out over months, one that isn't mine to tell all of in one sitting. What I can tell you is that later that night, when the party had dissolved into its awkward ending, when the white peonies were being cleared and the string quartet was packing their cases, Sorel and I sat in her car in the parking garage, and she showed me the photograph again under the dome light. "He looks like Dad," she said, which was a strange thing to say and also precisely right. "He does," I said. "Do you think she ever thought it was for our protection? Like, actually thought that?" I looked at the photograph, at the man on the porch in coastal Maine, squinting into whatever light I'd been using. "Yeah," I said, "I think she actually thought that." "That's almost worse." "Yeah," I said, "it is." We sat in the car for another hour after that, not talking much, just existing in the same space in a way we hadn't done since we were children sharing a room, before we learned that the resources of our mother's attention were finite and we were somehow in competition for them. It felt like what I imagined decompression felt like, the slow, necessary equalization of pressures after a long time underwater. I don't have a neat conclusion for you. I don't have a reconciliation in a hospital corridor or a tearful phone call where my mother admitted everything. Life doesn't run on that schedule. What I have is this. My father and Sorel spoke for the first time 6 weeks after graduation. It was 37 minutes long, and she called me immediately after, and the first thing she said was, "He already knew about your Dr. Prudhomme thing. You told him about it." "I did," I said. "He was proud," she said. "He said so." I had to put the phone down for a minute after that. Not because I was crying, though I was, but because I needed both hands to hold the weight of a small and ordinary thing, a father being proud of his daughter, that I had spent 30 years convincing myself I didn't need. It turns out you can be a doctor and still not know everything about what heals. If any part of this story felt like yours, like something you've been carrying without the right words for, hit like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.